We sit by the fire under the quiet sky. Let me tell you a story. The trees of the Blackwood Expanse did not look like they belonged on any map. They were ancient, twisted things with bark that looked like charred bone, and their canopies locked together so tightly that the afternoon sun was choked out before it could touch the forest floor. Elias had only meant to take a short detour off the main trail to photograph a waterfall he'd read about. That was 5 hours ago. Now, his compass needles spun in lazy, useless circles, and the battery on his phone had died abruptly, despite showing a full charge moments before. The temperature was dropping fast, turning his breath into plumes of white mist. The silence of the woods was absolute. No birds, no insects, just the crunch of his own boots on dead leaves. Panic, cold and sharp, began to pool in his stomach. Just as the last bruised purple light of dusk faded into true black, Elias saw it, a shape in the gloom. He stumbled through a thicket of briars, ignoring the thorns tearing at his jacket, and burst into a small, unnaturally circular clearing. In the center sat a cabin. It was a sagging, rotting structure, its roof caving in on one side. The windows were opaque with grime, reflecting the weak moonlight like blind eyes. Relief washed over him, though it was instantly tainted by a deep, instinctual unease. Shelter was shelter, however. He approached the porch, the steps groaning under his weight, and pushed the heavy wooden door. It gave way with a rusted shriek. Inside, the air was heavy, smelling of mildew, dry rot, and something metallic like old pennies. Elias clicked on his heavy-duty flashlight, sweeping the beam across the room. The relief evaporated, replaced by a creeping dread. The cabin was not simply abandoned. It was a shrine to something profoundly wrong. The walls, which he initially thought were covered in peeling wallpaper, were actually carved with thousands of frantic, overlapping tally marks. In the center of the room sat a heavy oak table, and upon it were dozens of glass jars. Elias stepped closer, his hand trembling. The jars were filled with cloudy, yellowish formaldehyde. Floating inside them were things he couldn't quite identify at first, until the flashlight illuminated a perfectly preserved human ear in one, and a coiled thick mass of pale hair in another. Surrounding the jars were delicate structures built entirely from the tiny bones of birds, tied together with rusted wire. He backed away, his breath hitching. He told himself to leave, to take his chances in the freezing woods, but his eyes caught something else in the corner of the room. A rocking chair faced away from him, towards the wall, and it was slowly, rhythmically rocking. Creak, creak, creak. There was no wind. The floorboards beneath Elias's feet vibrated slightly with each movement of the chair. He stood frozen, his flashlight beam trembling on the back of the chair. Then the rhythmic sound stopped. A wet, dragging noise came from the ceiling directly above him. Dust sifted down onto his shoulders. Something heavy was moving on the second floor, sliding across the wood with the sound of tearing meat. Then, the trap door to the attic, previously hidden in the shadows, burst open. A smell hit Elias so forcefully he gagged, the overwhelming stench of a slaughterhouse left to rot in the sun. From the black square of the attic, something began to descend. It was a limb, but it was too long, with joints bending in impossible directions, wrapped in pale, wet skin that seemed to hang loose off the bone. Primal terror severed Elias's paralysis. He didn't scream. His throat was completely locked. He simply turned and bolted. He lunged for the doorway, but the heavy oak door violently slammed shut on its own, inches from his face. He threw his entire body weight against it. Once, twice. On the third hit, the corroded hinges screamed and the door burst open, sending Elias tumbling out onto the porch. He didn't look back. He scrambled to his feet, dropped his heavy backpack to shed the weight, and ran blindly into the tree line. Behind him he heard a sound that would haunt his final hours. A low, gargling screech that sounded like a chorus of drowning men, followed by the heavy, thundering sound of the cabin's porch splintering. Elias ran. He tore through bushes, slammed his shoulders against tree trunks, and waded through icy streams that soaked him to the bone. Adrenaline pushed him past exhaustion, past the pain of a twisted ankle, and a deep gash on his cheek from a rogue branch. He ran until his lungs felt like they were filled with shattered glass, and his legs finally gave out, sending him crashing into the soft, damp moss. He lay there in the pitch black, gasping for air, clutching his chest. He listened, terrified of hearing the wet, dragging sounds approaching. But there was nothing. Total suffocating silence. He sat up, wincing in pain. His flashlight had been lost somewhere in his frantic sprint. It was too dark to see his own hands in front of his face. He had survived the cabin. He had escaped whatever horror waited inside. But as his heart rate began to slow, the true gravity of his situation settled over him like a burial shroud. He had run in a blind panic for miles, spinning in circles, zigzagging through the darkest, deepest part of a forest he didn't know. He had dropped his pack, which held his emergency blanket, his water, and his flares. He reached out, his hand touching the bark of a nearby tree. It felt different, slick, cold, and strangely soft. The fog began to roll in, thick and heavy, smelling faintly of old pennies. Elias tried to stand, but his twisted ankle screamed in protest. He hobbled forward a few paces, the trees seemingly pressing closer together, locking their branches above to seal him in. The woods had merely used the cabin to flush him out, to disorient him, to pull him so deep into their belly that there was no way out. Elias Thorne sat at the base of a great dead oak, pulling his thin jacket around his trembling shoulders as the freezing fog swallowed him completely. 3 days later, a search and rescue team found his car parked at the trailhead. 6 months later, a hiker found his discarded backpack caught in a briar patch. But no one ever found a rotting cabin with the jars. And despite massive search efforts spanning hundreds of miles, Elias Thorne was never seen again, becoming just another whispered ghost story told by the locals who knew better than to stray from the path.